Frank will attest, we didn't really know how many people we were going to get, so it's a fantastic turnout, and it's great to see everybody. What I envisaged doing, if there was sort of only 15 or 20, was doing a bit of a guided tour, but with more than sort of 15 or 20 people, it just gets impossible. So when we have a bigger group, it's just nice to give everybody an overview of the museum. I know many of you have perhaps been here before over the years, so some of the things that I'll tell you, you may have heard before, some perhaps not. Well, my name's James Hewing, and I'm the museum director, and I've been here since January. Some of you will know I used to run the VMCC for 10 years, so that's my background, if you like. But I knew the museum very well over the years through an event that we used to run, the Festival of 1,000 Bikes, and Roy Richards, the founder of the museum many years ago, was very, very helpful to me when we were getting the event going, in terms of supplying bikes and things like the Norton rotaries, which we've just had a little issue starting there. Foul the plugs very easily, those things. But I'd got a background in the museum through the VMCC, so when I came in January, it wasn't like I didn't have a great feel for the place, and indeed a great love of the place. So the museum was founded back in 1984, so it's our 30th anniversary this year, by a gentleman called William Roy Richards. And a lot of people who have been around old bikes a long time will recognise the name of Roy. He was a big figure. In many ways, Roy was a force of nature, and Roy had made his money in the 1960s and 1970s, first in the building trade, and then latterly in plant hire and crane hire. And Roy was involved with a company, it was his own company called Richards and Wallington. And to give you some idea of Roy's background, at one time, just talking about the plant hire aspect of Roy's business, Roy was JCB's biggest customer, so that gives you some idea of the scale of Roy's plant hire business. And when Roy sold the company, what he could have done was go and sit on a desert island and have a very nice and long retirement. But Roy, I always describe Roy, and I knew Roy, and anybody that knows him would attest to this, I always describe Roy as the ultimate patriot. Roy loved anything British. Now, of course, his passion was British motorcycles, and Norton in particular. But Roy was the ultimate patriot, and unfortunately Roy passed away in 2008, but even up towards his death he was still running around in an old 800 series Rover, because it was built just down the road. And that's what I mean by the fact that he could have afforded, Roy could have afforded any car, but he still ran around in an old 800 series Rover because he loved everything British. And it was a great joy to Roy, actually, to see Triumph and the resurgent British motorcycle industry. Triumph and now latterly Norton. So that's where the sort of the background of the museum came from, and Roy had started his private collection, which was based initially around Norton's, and Roy, by the time he came to think about opening the museum, and the idea came to him in the late 1970s, he'd got a collection of about 350 bikes himself, and so he was a big collector. And he'd been around one or two of the sort of established museums, both in this country and in Europe, and thought I could do that, and I could do it on a bigger scale, and to a degree I could perhaps do it better and just concentrate, but solely on British motorcycles, which of course is what he did. A lot of people contacting the museum indeed don't realise that we are 100% British only. So Roy, ultimately what Roy did, Roy put his money where his mouth was, and put a lot of money where his mouth was. And that takes some doing. Because if there's one, it's all right if you've got sort of a surefire investment, but if there's one sure way of losing money and burning through your fortune, it's opening a museum. Anybody got a few quid here? Don't open a museum. And on the first day that the museum opened, late October, early November 1984, the NEC over the road there was also already established, and the chief executive of the NEC at the time came over to visit, 'cause there was a lot of invited guests, and he said, do you want to come out there? I know you could probably hear there. And the chief executive at the NEC said, Roy, this is amazing, fantastic thing you've done, and there was hundreds of people here and it was buzzing. But he said, you wait till February, wet Wednesday in February, there'll be 2 people and a dog here, and you'll have a problem. And of course, he was right. And so what Roy very quickly did, and because he started to get a lot of inquiries because of the facilities that were already on site, Roy started doing meetings and conferences, first for bike clubs and old vehicle clubs, and then as the museum buildings progressed, or rather as the plans progressed, some of the buildings that you'll see over there on the right that were planned to be, on my right rather, that were planned to be other museum halls were redesigned and given over to conference. And now, and quite quickly, in the mid-1980s there, the National Motorcycle Museum established itself as one of the largest standalone conference venues in the UK. And that was why the museum, and it is true today to a degree, that is why the museum can exist in the way that it does through the very successful conference business that we run. And you'll see the car park's packed today, but obviously all those people, and the car park is packed, it's an 800-900 space car park, all those people are over in the conference facilities which sit on that side. And indeed, if anybody's ever been to, for example, the TTRA do here, I think Dave McMahon, I've seen Dave, he's been here before. You've been here, haven't you, Dave? Yeah, drinking many times. The bigger facilities are actually subterranean, and they're actually on 3 floors. And so you look at the buildings here and you think, well, hang on, that's not a massive conference facility. It's actually 13 conference suites. The biggest one can accommodate with the stage, and there's a Whirlix that comes up out the ground. That's the Imperial Suite, where we have some of the big events, and that can hold about 1,200 people standing or 800 people seated. And again, it is museum related because the two, one doesn't exist without the other. It's a symbiotic thing, if you like, but a lot of people don't realise the extent of the conference business and how important it is to the museum business. And incidentally, one of the interesting things, I suppose, about the conference business is we're the largest venue in the UK for Asian weddings. Asian weddings are usually very big. If anybody's been to an Asian wedding, they're 600, 700, 800 people very often. That's quite common. And we're one of the few venues that can accommodate that amount of people seated. So just a little interesting aside. And most weekends in the summer we will have an Asian wedding in of 600, 700, 800 people. We're the largest British motorcycle museum in the world, of course. The Barber collection out in Alabama there claims to be the largest museum in the world at about 1,200 bikes. That may in fact be true, but that's a very eclectic collection of Japanese, Italian, American, British, etc. We're 100% British only. And in the collection now, and do you remember I talked about Roy having 350 bikes when he started the collection, and that grew in the early part of the 2000s to about sort of 600-700 bikes. The collection now, post-fire, we'll only touch on the fire very briefly, but the collection now post-fire is actually over 1,000 machines. And so what a lot of people don't realise, and the fire always gets raised as a question, inevitably and I suppose fairly, although it is a long time ago now, 11, 12 years ago, the collection now contains a good 350 bikes more than it did before the fire. So not only were all the bikes restored or replaced, and they weren't all restored because there were some not worth, if you like, not worth restoring. It would have cost us more to restore a Bonneville T140 to buy a nice new Bonneville T140, or nice second-hand Bonneville T140 as it were. So, but obviously all the special machines were restored. There are now, I think, only about 8 bikes to restore. A couple of rudgers, Dave, where we've got to cast the crankcases, so not easy restorations. But from the bikes that were damaged, I think there are only 7 or 8 bikes in the queue now, and they are real one-offs, very specialist things where we've got to have crankcases recasted and what have you. But it is to a degree, whilst I don't want to brush over it, it is to a degree ancient history, and the collection is far stronger and indeed better than it was before the fire. No one could ever say that the fire was a good thing, but that classic phrase, silver linings and all that, some good did come out of it in terms of reinvigorating and making the collection much bigger. And that's what a lot of people don't realise. So the museum today consists of about five, not about five, halls. It does consist of 5 halls, starting there, Hall 1 through to Hall 5 there at the back. And Hall 1, when you go through later on, you'll see it's Roy that was Roy's idea to brand it 60 glorious years, because, as I say, the ultimate patriot. He loved the British motorcycle industry, and he always felt the dawn of the British industry through to the 1960s were obviously its golden days, which we all know in terms of the amount of manufacturers, in terms of the amount of machines that were being produced in this country, often locally. Birmingham, obviously, Coventry, Norton, BSA, Triumph, etc., etc. And so the earliest bike that we've got in the collection is the Humber Trike, 1898, and it goes through in Hall 1 to machines of the 1960s. You'll see very few cars in the collection. The cars that are in the collection tend to be lurking just out here, and they're cars specifically of motorcycle manufacture, BSA, AJS, or etc. You'll also see very few scooters. We've got a Triumph Tiger S, and when you're wandering around, try and spot with the Hesketh. We've got a Hesketh electric scooter, which is a very unsuccessful thing, weird and wonderful thing. I'm sure nobody's ever seen one before. If you have, it'll be a wonder. But there are almost no scooters in the collection, and the reason for that's simple. Roy hated scooters. And one of his, he left a lot of stipulations in his ongoing control of the museum trust, his wishes, before he passed away, and one of it was that we didn't fill the place with bloody scooters. That's true, really true. Hall 2, when you go through to Hall 2, a lot of Brough Superiors, who I think we own 13 or 14 Broughs. Of particular interest, if you've not been to the museum before, the Golden Dream. You'll see it because, as its name suggests, it's golden. Anybody that knows about Broughs, of course, will realise they didn't make this machine. It was a prototype that they were going to produce, and the Second World War actually put pay to its production. Displayed at the Earl's Court show in 1939. We've got that bike here. When we bought it, the guys, the restoration guys that we have working for us, started to strip the engine to see if there was indeed any internals in it, which they believed there wasn't, and there wasn't. But under the cylinder head there was a newspaper sheet, a page from 1939. The Nottingham Evening Post, indeed, and of course Brough was Nottingham. And one of the mechanics had written, and the ladies present, and we won't use the word, but it was a word that began with B, it's got 2 L's in it and ends in S, and he'd written that word across this newspaper sheet and stuffed it under the cylinder head. And so when the guys put the bike back together, they've left that under there. all 2. Hall 3, a lot of Vincents in all 3, an eclectic mix in all 3. Particularly this year, with the anniversary of the First World War, we've got a fantastic Clino machine gun, Vickers machine gun outfit that's been out a lot this year to different production companies and TV, for TV work. We've got a nice collection of military machines in there. And also, if you look towards the back of the military machines, you'll see a little well bike. And you know those little well bikes, little mini bikes that were dropped by parachute in canisters? And we've got a nice one there, but we've also got the canister and the parachute, and that's quite unusual because obviously the canisters and the parachutes got left on the battlefield, chucked away, run over, whatever, blown to bits. And this one's complete, and the reason it's complete is it was found complete with its undeployed parachute in the mud of the banks of the River Rhine. Wow. and was restored, and that's why it is 100% complete. So do have a look at that, because it's only a little thing, but it is quite interesting in that respect. Triumph locally, Meriden, Coventry, of course, Hall 4 is the majority of Hall 4 is given over to the Triumph collection. And you'll see just how many Triumphs that we've got in there, including the very early Minerva engined Triumph. And Hall 5, where our recalcitrant white Charger's just been dragged out of, is all the competition machines. So whether they're scrambles machines, trials machines, sprint machines, world record breaking straight line sprint machines, or the race machines, they're all in Hall 5. One of the particular interests for people, and caused a lot of interest just recently on the Isle of Man at the Classic TT, is we've got all the Works Norton rotaries, one of which is out front misbehaving itself. And if you're looking at the Works Norton rotaries, they're all together on the back wall. You'll see we've got the earliest production or pre-production race machine that Brian Crichton, the father of the rotary race bikes, built out of a crash police bike. On no budget at all. They've got a crash police bike there up there at Shenston, I think it was at the time, and they built the first race bike in I think 1986, it was 1985, 1986, out of a crash police bike. That's quite an interesting bike that people tend to overlook, so do have a look at that. And it's called Waltzing Walter, and the reason it was called Waltzing Walter was because the frame that they designed, it was fast, it was powerful, it was fantastic, but they couldn't get the thing to go in a straight line, so do have a look at that. The Norton rotaries, in fact, just for your interest, because people often ask about the collection and the value of the collection and who restores the collection. The Norton rotaries that Roy brought all pretty much in one go or in two goes, we paid about 1.3, 1.4 million for them, and we've got them all, and that's a great thing to have. Just talking about the Classic TT, a common sort of accusation of museums like this, or any museum, is that they can be a bit dry and a bit, you know, if you love the subjects, it's fantastic, but you know, we don't run the bikes or what have you. A few weeks ago, we took Robert Dunlop's JPS Norton. You saw it, over to the Isle of Man for Michael, of course, the rising star of the TT. For him to ride in the Joey Dunlop The Rivals parade, and this parade consisted of all the guys that were still around on the machines of the time that were Joey's rivals in that period. And if the riders weren't around, they were represented by significant other people, and obviously Robert Dunlop, sadly gone now, was represented by most obviously his son Michael. And you saw this.
It wasn't a parade.
You saw, and so Michael Dunlop, me and Michael were like that. Never met him before, Michael. So he takes the bike over, and he's a lovely guy. Never met him, and he said, "Oh, this is fantastic, fantastic privilege." And I said, "No, it's a great privilege for you to ride your dad's bike, Michael. You know, anytime, feel free." To been through the workshop, to been down to Brian Crichton, who now lives down in Dorset, running nicely, run it around the car park here. Took it to a little event, Brackley, that festival of motorcycling at Brackley. We gave it a little run there. It's fine. Brakes, tyres, the whole thing, been through the engine, beautiful. But it's always a worry, isn't it, in a parade? So anyway, on the day of the parade, I said to Michael, "Oh well, Michael, you know, never ridden before, it's only a parade, isn't it?" And he fixed me with a steely glare and sort of quite, in quite a sort of aggressive way, like he is, or like racers are, said, "No, I'm going to go for it." And he wasn't kidding. And I thought, oh God. And it's not that we're bothered about the bike getting damaged, we've got a crate full of spares, and hey, we had a fire when we rebuilt everything. Things are made to be run. And we want to dispel this myth that the museum's a dry place, because it's not. We want the bikes to be run. So anyway, I'm on the start line, we've got the thing fired up, it's running beautifully. You have to be a bit careful because they do get very hot very quickly. And off he went. And I mean he went. And he went flat out like he was on his BMW that he won the TT on. And anyway, to cut a long story short, and you saw this yourself, and everybody that was round the circuit came to us the following day, talking to us about things and saying how amazing it was. From a standing start on a bike he'd never sat on before, he'd sat on the grid, put in 109 mile an hour lap. on a bike he'd never, where the suspension wasn't set up, he'd never ridden it before, from a standing start.
Came out the top of Concubody straight down to 11th milestone, right?
like his arse was on fire. Yeah. Completely bent it, bottomed it out. I think somebody thought it might have been the bottom of Bray Hill. Knocked the back of the exhaust off, crushed it all in. I think he went over Aggo's Leap vertical. Somebody said. But anyway, that's what the bikes are there for, and that's great, and that's good for us that people see the bikes used in that way. The entire collection's worth, give or take, around 34 million pounds. And people always ask about restoration, and the guys are on holiday this week, but the museum is a final thing, and I'm very privileged to be here. But it's a wonderful place because now Roy's gone, it's still a family business. Nick and Simon, Roy's sons, and Roy's widow Christine control the family trust. I'm now museum director, which is a great privilege. But it is still a family business, and that's a marvellous thing. And a lot of the staff that work here have worked here many years, some from when the museum first opened, and so there is this real family atmosphere. And a good example of this is the restoration guys. We've got Colin Wall, who's now in his late 60s, who's the granddad. We've got Wes, who's sort of about my age, in his 40s, who's Colin's son, and they're the restoration team. And we've just taken Wes's son Kyle on as the apprentice. We've taken him on officially on the government apprentice scheme, where he's going to college 1 day a week and then he's in the workshop the other 4 days a week. So that just illustrates that whole family thing. Whole generations of people, and whole generations of people in that respect, passing on really specialist skills. And in the coming years, we want to be part of that. We want to expand this apprentice programme, whereby we're not going to be a Rolls-Royce taking God knows how many apprentices on a year, but if we could take one apprentice on a year and pass some of those very, very specialist skills on, I think that's something that we should be involved in, and something that we are going to be involved in. So I've probably bored you all long enough.